So welcome back folks, this is Shardul Gavande back again from Ace Knowledge, and in this video we'll see else if and else statement in Python. So let's open our idle Python. Over here let's create a new file. Okay, let's save this file first as abc.py on the desktop, and let's start with if else if. So as of now we have seen only if and else statement, right? So now we are going to see if, that is multiple if statements, if else if and else, and the last we have as else statement. So let's take some variable as x is equal to, let's say 8, y is equal to, let's say 5, and z is equal to, let's say 2. So we have over here three variables x, y, z with some values, and let's start with our statement. So if x is greater than y, so I want two conditions in one if statement. So I'll say if x is greater than y, and so in other languages, in Java or in any other languages, C++, we use the operator and as in such symbol manner which depicts that this is an AND operator. But in Python we don't have to use any symbols, we can simply write the word and in this word and we have all the operations, logic gate operations of AND operand. Okay, and the second condition is x is greater than z. So I have two conditions in my first if statement. So if these two conditions are true, I will say print and the double quotes x is greater. Okay, next I want another if statement. So I will not write if, I will write as elif statement. Okay, and into that I'll say y. So we have done for the comparison with x in relation to y and z. So let's compare now y, that is, let's say if y is greater than z and y is greater than x. But here we don't need to write y is greater than x, because if this condition is false, we will automatically get to know that x is smaller than y and z. So we'll exclude this particular condition and we'll simply write as y is greater than z, and we'll say colon. So if this condition satisfied, I will print over here y is greater. Okay, so if both the if statements or if and else statements are false, I have something called as else statement. So in that I will print if x is not greater than y and z, and if y is also not greater than z, then I have the remaining part as z is greater. Okay, so let's execute this part. I'll save this and I'll execute. So the output comes as x is greater, as the value of x is 8, which is greater than 5 and 2. But hold on, you may be wondering that we have learned if statements and we can write multiple if statements. So why this elif or else if statement? We can write a simple if statements too. So why this elif? So let's check. So if we write if and if multiple if statements, excluding the else if part, only if statement. So let's check what happens. So if I press F5 and I get output as x is greater and y is greater. So what's happening over here? So let's focus on the code part. So what it is doing is it is checking for this if condition, right? That is if x is greater than y and x is greater than z. If this condition is true, it is executing the statement which is x is greater. Next, it is again checking for this condition which is y is greater than z. So here the value of y is 5 and z is 2, where y has a value which is greater than z. So it is printing again the output as y is greater. And this else part is not being taken into consideration as this value or because this condition is true, right? So what is happening is all the if statements which we have in our code, all those if statements are being executed even if the condition is either true or false, right? But that should not happen. So what I want is, I want that if only this particular condition is true, the required statements or the output should be printed, and then the program should get terminated. It should not go for further if statements, right? So that is the reason we have elif statement. That means it will check for the first if statement. If this condition, if condition, both the conditions are true, it will print the desired output and it will simply terminate your program. It will not go to the rest of the else if statements, right? And if both the if or else if conditions are false, it will then go to the else part. And what was happening here is, it was checking for this if all the if statements which we are having in the code. So let's say if I have value as 2 over here and here as 5, so this else part will go for this if statement. So this else part, whatever we have at the last, and if you are not using else if statement, then this else part is of this particular if statement. That means if this condition is false, it will execute the else part, which is z is greater. Okay, so let's check it. So we are getting here output as x is greater, okay, and then z is greater, because y is not greater than z. It has a value which is less than z. So if you are writing if statements and not using elif, then every if statement which you are writing, so this was a smaller code. And when you code for any project, you may have multiple, if it is a form, registration form, you may have many fields, right? So if you write if statements, multiple if statements, so all those if statements will get executed whether or not your first condition is either true or false. So for that reason, to avoid executing all the if statements, you have else if. That means if only one statement, only one if statement is true, it will execute that statement and it will simply terminate your program and get out of your code. So this is the right way to code, and here you get the output as x is greater. Now we'll give the value as 5, we'll give value here as 3 and y as 12. So now I'm giving value for x as 3, which is small. Okay, so now let's check what happens. So it has to go, as per our rule, it has to go for the first statement, check for this first condition, first if condition. If it is true, execute and terminate the program. Else, if it is false, then go to the next if statement, check for this condition. If here it is true, execute, terminate the program. Even if this is false, then finally execute the else part. If all the else if statements are false, then you should execute the else part. So let's check what do we get. We get as y is greater, right? That means it has checked for this, it was false, then it came to the second part and then checked again for the condition, true, then executed this condition, else false. Now let's give value for z as 40 and let's check what happens. So we'll get the output as z is greater. Because both these conditions are false, it executed the else part. So that's how if, else if and else works in Python. That's it from this video. Thank you so much and don't forget to subscribe.